Given the summer we've just been through, you'd wonder if the climate's got something against us. The unrelenting dry over here and devastating rain and floods in the east. We all saw the dreadful images of wrecked property and crops caused by the floods. However, there was at least a useful legacy, topped up soil moisture profiles. So we're going to look at the challenges ahead in season 2011, starting in the east. After years of wishing for wet, most of south and eastern Australia got more than it bargained for. Under this lake lies a wheat paddock. Conditions like these are a first for many.
To be honest, I've never seen a season. I'm not old enough to see a season like this. In fact, yesterday I was only talking to a neighbour or two and they're in their 70s and they've never seen a season like this either.
It may look dry now, but that's just the crust. Below the surface, the soil is damp, and that spells opportunity.
So if moisture is not a limiting factor, and with the right varieties that are out there and the right nutrition, we could be in for a very good year.
But it's easier said than done. Consultant Bruce Larkham, who works with Peter on GRDC's Victorian Advisor Planning Committee, recommends getting in while the going's good, because waterlogged paddocks are definitely on the cards this year.
In some soil types that could be really causing us to run into problems quite early in the season if we start getting some decent rains, say in May, and so we need to be timely with our sowing. Perhaps consider sowing a little bit on the early side.
That's Peter's plan on his mixed clay loam soil here in the Goulburn Valley, along with a few other precautions.
We'll definitely be looking before Anzac Day to get them in, because if it does start to get very damp in May, we know what our soils will do. We won't get back onto them. So we'll be considering everything like a bit more fertiliser up front in case we can't put top dress later on, and also what seed treatments we do to give that seedling more protection in the early stages, knowing that we may have difficulty coming on in the spraying.
The wet has also added to pre-sowing preparations. Volunteer plants, weeds and their usual entourage have taken full advantage of the favourable conditions, like these aphids in Peter's canola paddock.
There's adults and young ones, a couple of generations there.
The so-called green bridge between seasons looks more like a superhighway this year, so destroying that stepping stone to this year's crop is really going to pay. The few weeks before sowing are the last chance for growers to take action.
There is green still out there in the paddock now. To get on top of that, to have a break for disease and pest control prior to sowing.
But it may not just be the weeds that need clearing. The wet has flattened crops and stubble, and that spells potential trouble, especially if you sow between rows.
This year's going to be a lot more difficult because of the way the crops fell over. Instead of them standing up, they're actually leaning over. Even though they're cut off short, what's left is falling over. And it's going to be a lot more difficult to inter-row sow into. So to just try and sow them and so I'm going to keep all those stubbles and be very dogmatic about that may not be the right approach, because come sowing time you might find that you can't physically do it.
He's advising many of his clients to consider getting rid of all that biomass, even if it means burning it off.
It's not a nice job to do. Most growers don't like doing it. It's a big job, so that they been trying to avoid it, but it may be something we may not be able to avoid this year. It may be a last resort.
The wet has also taken its toll on seed quality,
which is going to be a real critical point this year, because with weather damage, a lot of rain at harvest time, we are already seeing quite a bit of poor seed results coming back from our seed testing.
Samples can be sent away to specialist labs, or you can test your own seed using GRDC's recently published fact sheet and formula. If you do it yourself, you can even use a hand-graded sample straight out of your header.
To get an idea of what's going on, I would grade out, say, 100 seeds, getting rid of any broken ones or any debris, and then use that formula and do a germination percentage test as well as an establishment percentage. And that'll give me an early indication, even before the seed is graded, how this seed is likely to perform in the ground.
Testing is the only way you'll get an accurate picture.
You want to know that when you do plant it, the right things are going to happen, and you are going to end up with the plant populations you're looking for. There's no point in planting the same number of kilos per hectare because that's what you've always done, because your seed isn't the same this year.
Testing will help avoid the consequences of underseeding, but it can also help you choose between your existing varieties, even whether it's worth investing in fresh seed.
If you sow a similar sowing rate to what you've sown in the past, and you only get 50% of that seed up, that could be a real big cost and much more expensive than what it would be to buy in some seed.
You can get information from GRDC's variety trial results, but before making any decisions this year, the real trick is to ask around.
Certainly speak to your advisors. And I would encourage you to speak to as many people as possible, not just one person, and speak to your neighbours on how different varieties that they've been using this last year have gone, because you might find that there's a neighbour that had a variety that didn't perform too well while it's been drier, persisted with it, and during this last 12 months has really come up trumps.
But some of the best advice may even come from closer to home.
There's probably a lot of growers out there that haven't seen a wet season before, or what you call really wet anyway, and so they might have to resort to asking a previous generation, what did you do and what can we expect?